How often do you see these Michelin star restaurants in these hotels? And are they leased or does the hotel own them?
From a liability perspective, they don't want liability for anything that they don't have control over.
Right, 100%. In my experience, all the models that I've underwritten, F&B is usually like an 80% expense ratio, and you're losing all your money. Feels like just a liability half the time.
Goes to that restaurant to dine often, to that hotel to dine at one of the restaurants, there's a high probability that you're going to recommend that hotel to the guests.
Before we get started, this episode is brought to you by Toast, the all-in-one restaurant management platform built specifically for the food and beverage industry. Whether you're running a hotel restaurant, an independent bistro, or a multi-location concept, Toast helps operators streamline everything from point of sale to payroll to guest analytics. It's the kind of tool that actually understands hospitality. Check out the link in the description of the episode to see how Toast can work for your operation. What role does the restaurant actually play in a hotel success? From asset valuation to guest experience, we're getting into all of it. Today we're joined by
Kaushik Varadarajan,
an associate professor of the practice and director of the real estate program at Boston University School of Hospitality Administration. He brings a deep expertise in hotel real estate across HVS.
Yeah, I think really what I like highlight is I was lucky enough to have the opportunity to work in many different countries. So work across markets, work across cultures, work with people across different cultures, work with investors and owners and understand different perspectives. And it's been fascinating to see how different it can be from one part of the world to the other, and in many ways so similar. It doesn't matter if you're in Russia or you're in Japan, investors in the end want the same thing. So I think just having that global perspective and outlook on the real estate side of hospitality has been fascinating.
So, well, thank you for joining us. And if you want, we'd really love for you just to give us a quick introduction and tell us a little bit about your work experience.
Okay, right. This is my 6th year at Shaw. Time flies when you're having fun. And before I came to Shaw, I spent 15 years doing consulting with HVS around the world. Worked in about 65 countries, and then spent 4 years with Hilton as their head of development for South Asia. So the best part of my career was, and any career, I think, if you look back at it, is a series of fortunate accidents. And I think the best part of my career was being able to work in so many different countries and so many different regions around the world and learn from every single one of them. So, yeah, and I'm fortunate enough to be here. I get to mess with young minds. I kind of share some of my war stories and some of my experiences with students on a daily basis.
Awesome, thank you. And we're just going to give you the opportunity here to plug next year's Real Estate Symposium.
Absolutely.
Sure.
We just wrapped up our 2026 Real Estate Symposium yesterday. We sold out about 3 weeks ago, had a fantastic group of leaders. We had a great real estate competition that was global in nature. I went to sleep last night, slept 10 hours, and woke up today, started planning the 2027 symposium. It's going to be bigger, it's going to be larger, it's going to be more fun, more students, more industry leaders, more CEOs, more of a global focus. So that's one you don't want to miss.
Fantastic. I love to hear it. Starting off with our first question here. How much do hotel restaurants actually contribute to a hotel's overall success? And in what ways?
Okay, it's a great question. So I think one of the things that I really enjoy about the industry is our product and our brands are not boring and the same. You have so many different positionings. So the answer to your question depends on what positioning you're looking at. If you're looking at the limited service and focused service aspect of it, F&B and restaurants are just pretty much treated as an amenity you have to offer, whether it's something as simple as a free breakfast in the corner of the lobby, or is it something where you serve, at a Hilton Garden Inn or a Courtyard by Marriott or a Hyatt place, where you have just something that a place where people can have breakfast. So that's pretty simple, and it's more. The reality is that a lot of hotel owners at least look at it as something that is necessary to provide per the brand standards. However, higher up you go on the chain scale, I think restaurants really can have a positive impact on the hotel. And if you've been in my classes, I like talking in terms of buckets. So I talk about, we'll have the financial bucket that we'll talk about, and then I just talk about the bucket where guests use that information to make kind of choices of where they want to stay.
Like an occupancy driving bucket.
Yeah, so if you're looking at the occupancy driving bucket, I think it really depends on which city you're in. So if you're in which market you're in, if you're, say, New York City, then really how many restaurants you have or what kind of restaurants you have in the hotel may not really be a decision driver for people coming in because you step out and there are a million restaurants. I'm exaggerating a bit, but you have amazing restaurants across all levels in the cities. If you're going to a resort, then that might absolutely be important to you to see what kind of dining experiences they have to offer, and that might influence where you decide to stay. If you're talking about a true destination dining experience, then that might absolutely impact. You might choose to stay in that hotel because that particular dining establishment exists. It could be a Michelin star, it could be a celebrity chef. Then it could be the Zuma here at the Four Seasons, One Dalton. So then it could drive your desire to stay there. So more than occupancy, I think there's definitely an impact on the overall F&B revenues and the overall revenues of the hotel. It gives you a halo effect, which can help from a marketing perspective. And that can then drive more people to come and even just try your hotel out. The other thing that we have seen in the hospitality side of things is even though we have advanced search engines and we have all of these various OTAs, half of people coming into a city will still reach out to somebody they know and ask for a recommendation for a hotel. And if you're part of the local market who goes to that restaurant to dine often, to that hotel, to dine at one of the restaurants, there's a high probability that you're going to recommend that hotel to the guests.
I had a follow-up. How often do you see these Michelin star restaurants in these hotels? And are they leased or does the hotel own them?
So most of the time, so there are not as many of them, right? And then that kind of fits the theme that there are not as many Michelin star restaurants as there are restaurants. And so you look at, so that's a small subset to begin with. And then you start looking at a smaller subset of how many of them are within hotels. That's really small. And almost in all the cases that I've seen, these Michelin star restaurants and celebrity chef restaurants are typically some sort of a partnership where the space is leased out and the restaurant operator comes in and runs it. So they have access to the space. They have access to all of the other facilities and amenities that the hotel has to offer, including the entire arrival experience. So guests can pull up, there's valet parking available, you walk into this beautiful lobby, you have music, you have employees waiting there to guide you through the restaurant if you want. So all of that arrival experience is very difficult to accomplish with a standalone restaurant, but makes for a great ambiance if you are within a luxury hotel. So it's a win-win for both parties. So that's what I see most often.
All right, awesome. And so you mentioned in, say, like markets like New York, where there's a lot of restaurants around, and sometimes you need to add a ad hoc restaurant just for a brand standard. Would it be better to maybe try and negotiate the restaurant out of your franchise agreement, or is it just simply not possible if you're trying to go with a certain brand?
No, I think it's absolutely possible. And in fact, if you look at some of the most touristy places in New York City, for example, again, because I mentioned New York earlier, Times Square, right? A lot of the hotels around Times Square don't own their own restaurants. They just leased that space out so that somebody else is running the F&B and they can focus on running the hotel. And you would think that if a hotel that's in Times Square would want all of that traffic coming into their restaurants, but a lot of them just lease it out. So it's absolutely possible to do that. And also from a financial perspective, like if you look at rooms margins, profit margins on rooms, that's 80%. Whereas if you talk about F&B, in a lot of cases, you're lucky if you're breaking even. Right. So I think from all stakeholders within that space, they're much happier focusing on rooms than on F&B.
100%. In my experience, all the models that I've underwritten, F&B is usually like an 80% expense ratio, and you're losing all your money. It feels like just a liability half the time. So in that sense, I guess if I were a developer, my recommendation would almost always be lease the space. But is it generally tough to lease the restaurant space in the hotel, or is it super easy? Like from your experience, like what does it look like?
And why wouldn't a hotel just lease the space if the profit margins are so bad?
Yeah.
So I think in some cases, so we spoke about some of the places where it makes sense to lease out, right? It makes sense for the owner. It makes sense for the lessee who's coming in and going to take over that space because they have access to this existing infrastructure. They have access to this source of demand that's just walking right by their establishment. So all of that works. Now consider a situation where you're in Dayton, Ohio, and you really don't have that strong touristy demand, and it's really not a place where the locals want to come in. Even just with all of us here in the room, like, when was the last time you were super excited about going to a Holiday Inn or a Courtyard by Marriott or some other mid-market hotel for a dinner for a special occasion? We never do that. And no disrespect to any of those brands. They're fantastic. And I have to say, as I mentioned Holiday Inn, I love the breakfast skillets at the Holiday Inns when I stay there. But again, I go to the restaurant when I stay there. So if you're in a market and if you're in a product where there's limited local demand, then it's really difficult to make a case for the hotel to make a case to a lessee to say, hey, you should come in and take over this space. Because then really that hotel is surviving purely on the guests in that hotel, and that may not be enough to really drive a profitable operation. So that could be a challenge. The other case where you might not see leasing is at the other extreme when you're talking about luxury properties. Right? There, hotels might decide because they focus so much on the guest experience, and they're so focused on ensuring that that they have a seamless, smooth stay, high service standards from the time they check in to the time they check out. They might decide the F&B is such a strong touch point that you don't want to entrust that to somebody else, that you want to be the one running it so that the guests have a fantastic experience throughout.
Fantastic. Thank you. And while we're on the subject of leased versus operating, what do these lease agreements look like, especially in regards to liabilities? That's such a big thing. And I know it's different on a case-by-case basis. In your experience, what do they look like being negotiated, and generally, how do they work?
So I think probably the first conversation that usually happens is the financial side of things, right? Everybody wants, in any agreement, everybody wants the least amount of risk, right? Whether it's financial or otherwise. And so the hotel owner would love to get a fixed rent per square foot. That's a high number, and it grows by inflation, or whatever that metric is. The lessee who's taking over the space doesn't want a fixed rent. They would rather just have it completely be based as a percentage of revenues, because they believe that's fair. If they make more money, if it's a high traffic location, if there's more revenue coming in, then they're happy paying more. So there's usually a blend somewhere in between where it's like a minimal rent per square foot that's fixed, and then there's a percentage of revenues that comes in later, or a percentage of profit sometimes. So that's typically a negotiation point that's easier to negotiate. From a liability perspective, I think, the hotel side of it is very clear that they don't want liability for anything that they don't have control over.
Right.
So whatever operations happen within the restaurant establishment, that's entirely, the hotel has nothing to do with it. Similarly, if something happens that is a result of something in the other spaces of the hotel, then that should be the responsibility of the hotel and not the restaurant. So it is every legal contract I've ever looked at varies, but those are the underlying things of financial upside versus kind of risk.
Wow. So the lease structure seems pretty nuanced. I just underwrote industrial and in retail, and it's a triple net lease, not much ancillary incomes. It was pretty simple, just as simple as a multifamily, if not easier. How would you recommend you'd underwrite that ancillary revenue for F&B that you're leasing with the lease structure that we have, like the mix of rent per square foot and revenue percentage?
I think you mentioned industrial, right? Industrial is a little different because if I'm the owner of the industrial space and I lease it to Amazon or Walmart, right? I'm not suddenly in that business. I just built the real estate and then they run it, and one party doesn't impact the other. Whereas the relationship between a hotel and the leased restaurant space is very symbiotic. Imagine, because if you have a great F&B establishment and the hotel's in really poor shape and is not being run well and has severe operational challenges and reputational issues, that is going to impact the restaurant's operation and performance. And similarly, and vice versa. If you have a great hotel and then you have an F&B operation that's performing poorly and has either reputational issues or health issues and safety issues, then that is going to impact the hotel negatively. So I think, therefore, that is why the contracts between the two tend to be a lot more nuanced, with a clear understanding that, so you'll often find people go into these contract negotiations thinking that they're going to spend most of the time focusing on the financials. And the financials are usually probably the first 10, 20% of the process. And those are honestly the easiest to negotiate. It's all of these other nuanced approaches, because of the way the symbiotic relationship exists, that become really relevant. Who's responsible for maintaining which areas? who's responsible for fire life safety issues in these different spaces? If there is a fire, who's responsible for that? And was the hotel structurally not able, was it not built in a way that will impede such fire accidents from happening? Or is it the restaurant that's responsible? How do you handle billing? Can a hotel guest just go down to the restaurant and eat there and have it go into their room bill instead of having to pay separately? Will they do room service? And if they're also going to handle in-room dining, then are those employees vetted? Because the restaurant's employees now have access to the hotel spaces and to the hotel guest floors and to the hotel rooms. And so there are all of these other operational aspects that make these contracts and the relationship a lot more interesting, but also a lot more challenging to structure out from a contract perspective.
And I would say that easily answers the question of what's easier to operate or just to lease it. And, well, I guess the answer at the end of the day is it's even more complicated than just the question, right? Because you have more nuances when it comes to leasing the hotel in terms of those extra liabilities, and then versus operating it where you actually have to operate it.
Yeah, so moving on to the value of the hotel and how F&B really does make an impact on that. How do you see a strong F&B concept increasing the overall asset value of a hotel?
Yeah, I think F&B is, depending on the chain scale, F&B can be really important to the overall valuation of the hotel. And we've discussed in classes, right? Value can be tangible and intangible benefits. So if you look at, and when we talk about F&B, it's not just restaurants, right? It's also the kind of the meeting spaces and the ballrooms and in-room dining and all of that. So if you're talking about an upscale hotel to luxury hotel and somewhere in that space, they're really important. Meeting spaces form a big part of not just F&B revenues, but also bring in a lot of room demand and enhance occupancies of the hotel. So having a great meeting space and having great F&B operations within that space is important. It's also much more profitable than it is for restaurants. So it's very common for the meeting space side of things to have up to 50% profit margins, as opposed to 10 to 20% if you're lucky on the restaurant side of things. We have seen some innovative ways where focused service restaurants have handled their restaurant operations. So they might have a small meeting room, and they have a restaurant that's open typically only for breakfast. They might have it open for a certain amount of time during dinner, but that's not really a busy period for them. The breakfast happens to be the busiest, and they're pretty much just quiet and unused through the rest of the day. So I've seen hotels that will host a meeting in one of the small meeting rooms, and then actually move the entire dining experience to the restaurant so that you don't have to have a separate dining area. All the people in the meeting will just go have lunch or dinner in the restaurant. So that's another way to use that space efficiently instead of just building a restaurant and being able to use it for only one meal period.
How does that fit into brand standards? You worked at Hilton, and was there a time where it looked a bit complicated, or it was like, hey, look, like this may not work this way? Or was there a time where you had to try and figure out how it would or wouldn't work?
Yeah, I think if you're trying to do this in a restaurant, in a hotel that already exists, yeah, so you might have to reimagine some aspects of it. And maybe Amru, your team came first in the Hama asset management competition, right? So this is a classic case of asset management where you're taking an existing piece of real estate and trying to find a highest and best use for it and changing things around. Sure, there might be an initial investment involved, but there's a strong ROI on it. From a brand perspective, I think brands have gotten much better at seeing things from an owner's perspective, because it's the owner who's writing all the checks. And it's important that the owners are getting the returns that they are expecting. If owners stop getting healthy returns on their capital, then they stop building hotels, and then the music stops. So I think brands really understand that's important. So I think they're really happy to work with owners to create innovative solutions for these spaces that maximize their use, maximize revenues, reduce overheads. So I think, I don't think you're going to see any disagreement or pushback from the brand side of things on innovative uses of spaces.
Got it. And so let's suppose that you have a business plan, you're reimagining F&B meeting space. Is there anything in particular that debt or equity investors are looking for when evaluating that level of a concept? Or
So I think the owner, at a high level, they're looking for the same things. They want the same things from the assets. They want to know that the assets have have strong brands that'll bring people into the hotel. They're being run efficiently so that they generate profits. And there's a team that's maintaining the condition of the asset and the reputation of the asset, right? So whether it's a hotel, whether it's a restaurant, the goals are the same. Everybody's looking at bottom lines and profit margins. And so if you can find a restaurant operator, if you can find a restaurant company that will come in and can do that better, then logic says that you should have them do that, right? I think when we look at kind of macroeconomic theory, we say that each country should only build or create and sell products that they can do most efficiently, right? You create and you sell what you can do most efficiently, and then buy the rest from somebody else who can create and build it more efficiently and sell, make it cheaper and make it better, right? That's how the global economy works. The same thing applies to a hotel. We should find stakeholders who can do things better than we can, which is why we had our real estate symposium yesterday, and we had Tiffany Danielle, who's a CFO for the Union Square Hospitality Group. She shared that they work closely with a lot of hotel companies and hotel assets where they run the F&B, because this is what they do, this is what they specialize in, and they're great at doing that. So if I were an equity investor in a hotel project or a debt investor, debt holder in that project, then I would want to make sure that we are bringing in the stakeholders who can do it more efficiently than anybody else.
Nice. And is there any final advice you'd recommend for developer, investor in hotels that maybe we've missed and that we should acknowledge?
I think go out there. Firstly, it's always helpful to know what you don't know, or at least to have a level of self-awareness to say, I need expertise here. And so that's always helpful, because once you reach that level of awareness, then then the next stage is, okay, I don't know these things. And you can start asking questions, and then just ask how many questions as you want, and then see who has the right answers for them. And so that's important. Understanding that F&B is so fluid, it can change from day to day. Being comfortable with that and being set up to handle that level of volatility and that level of innovation is important. And lastly, we look at, is it going to make money? And at some level it has to make money. It could be on a standalone basis. It could be the halo effect and the overall other impact on the hotel that's going to help the hotel make more money. So in the end, it has to make money. If it doesn't make money, it might be cool right now, but then it's not going to stay cool because you're going to run out of money and then the music stops.
Amen. That about wraps it up. Thank you, Professor V, for joining us from lobbies to tables. Your insights into the world of hotel, restaurants, investments, real estate were very meaningful, and thank you so much. If you'd like to learn more about Professor V's work within the School of Hospitality, we'll include links in the episode description for his contact info.
Thank you for having me. A pleasure speaking with all of you.